I gave it back. Hi, good morning. Be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize for the delay this morning. We were ready to go shortly after 9 o'clock. I was on the bench and we were ready to proceed, but there was a legal issue that came up that involved not the next witness, but the following witness, one of the expert witnesses. So I wanted to resolve that with counsel before we heard from the witness, so we didn't have to do it either at sidebar or excuse you during the doctor's testimony. So I think we have it resolved, and hopefully things will proceed smoothly. We're going to hear from another lay witness first. Counsel, call your next witness, please.
The defense calls Boyd Martin.
Boyd Martin.
Please place your left hand on the Bible, sir. Raise your right hand and listen to my court clerk, who will administer an oath.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the testimony you give to this court regarding this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Boyd Martin, Martin.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Martin, have a seat. Please keep your voice up nice and loud. If you don't understand a question, please indicate that to the court, and I'll have counsel rephrase. Go ahead, counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Martin. Where do you live?
I live in Cochrane, Pennsylvania.
Are you a U.S. citizen?
I am.
What do you do for a living?
My wife and myself train horses. My wife's a dressage rider. I'm a 3-day event rider. In our sport, 3-day eventing has dressage, show jumping, and cross country. It's an Olympic sport.
Is Philip Dutton also in that sport?
Yes, he is.
Okay. And do you compete nationally in the United States?
Yes, and actually internationally representing America.
And in what competitions have you represented America in international competitions?
I've gone to 3 Olympic Games, I think 4 World Equestrian Games, and I think 2 Pan American Games.
Do you know Michael Barisone?
Yes.
How did you first come to know him?
Michael in the equestrian world is a legend. He's a very, very well-known, famous dressage trainer. I met him, I believe, in 2010. He's so good that he started actually training and coaching me and helping me develop my riding in dressage to a higher level.
Did he train you as well as your horse?
Yeah, I mean, he's a remarkable guy. He's obviously one of the best riders in this country, or if not the world. And I sort of went to him for improvement of my own riding and the improvement of horses. He's a brilliant horse trainer, great mentor, coach, competitor. Also a guy that's been there and done it, that sort of helped me in my career and point me in the right direction.
So approximately how many years of experience do you have observing Michael Barisone interact with horses?
Well, since being in this country, probably watching him for a couple of years before I started training with him, but closely sort of in a 10-year period.
Have you, in that time period, ever seen Michael Barisone abuse an animal?
Absolutely not. Michael is a fantastic horseman. To get the best out of the horses, the thing I learnt with Michael is sort of trust and confidence, and he's a passionate trainer, and really pointed me in the direction of sort of working with the animal without force.
Did there come a time when your relationship with Michael evolved beyond him being a coach and mentor into something else?
Yeah, I mean, I'm attracted to Michael just because of his character and his personality, and I think over time, you start off as coach and student, and then you somewhat develop a friendship. I love the guy. He was fun to be around. He was a great teacher. We had the same love for horses, the same sort of goals and drive for competition. And I'd have to say that we became good friends.
Did he assist you at all in an appearance at the London Olympics in 2012?
Yeah, Michael was remarkable. He actually flew to England and trained and coached me at no cost. And he was instrumental on helping me get to my first Olympic Games. And, it was something I'll always remember of how he sort of dropped everything here in America and came to England and worked with me to prepare for the Olympics.
Were you at the Rio Olympics in 2016?
Yes.
Did Michael assist you in connection with that competition?
Yeah, he was coaching some of the pure dressage riders at that contest. But he definitely was an influence to me at that point there. I mean, when you go to the Olympic Games, there's long build-up, there's weeks of where you're sort of in a training camp, and definitely Michael was there and assisted.
So, did you develop a friendship with him?
Yes.
Did you ever socialize with him outside of the context of horses?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Like when you go to these championship events, you often, training a horse takes about an hour, and you're there and you hung out together, you obviously had dinner together. My wife and myself owned a dressage horse that we brought over from Australia, and we believed Michael was so good at improving horses. We actually sent this horse to his training facility in New Jersey and went up and watched Michael train the horse and enjoyed dinner with him afterwards. And he was you see him at competitions as well, and he's he's one of those people you're drawn to at the show. Like, he's larger than life and just fun to be around.
Based upon your interactions with him professionally and socially, did you develop any sort of impression as to his truthfulness as a person?
Yeah, I mean, he is, to me, a very honourable and truthful person. I think to achieve what he's achieved in his career, you can't be a con. Like, it's so hard work, it's such a long road, it's just thousands and thousands of hours of training and practice, and you can't get to where Michael's got to in his career by being a phony. And I'd say he's a very honourable character. He's truthful, and all the dealings I had with him as a coach and student, and him training our horses and seeing him socially, he was a very truthful person.
Have you ever co-owned horses with Michael?
We had this one horse called Jeff the Chef that Michael trained and improved, and we ended up selling the horse. And so we owned the horse, but I believe Michael got a commission on the sale.
Do you have a barn facility in Pennsylvania?
Yes, we have a farm in Cochranville, Pennsylvania.
Was there ever a time where there was a horrific fire at a facility you were associated with?
Yeah, unfortunately in 2011 I was actually renting a 16-stall barn. It was just, we'd come to America in 2007, and it was a tragic event. It was there was an electrical fire that happened in the middle of the night from an electrical product called a hay steamer, and it was a disaster. This machine was a faulty machine, and the machine caught on fire. The whole building burnt down. I believe 6 horses died. The whole building was destroyed. We managed to save a number of the horses, but it was it was a horrible event.
As a horse owner, if you had been in that barn and noticed that hay steamer was somehow malfunctioning, would you have done something to address it?
Hold on. Let me see that sidebar. Sustained.
You mentioned that Michael was passionate in his work. Could you elaborate on that for the jury?
I mean, to be an Olympic athlete as successful as Michael, you've got to have determination and drive and positivity. You know, he was larger than life, a passionate guy. I don't know how much more to explain it, but he had a flamboyant personality. He loved so much what he did. It was really, I was magnetized to it a little bit. Like when he's coaching, you could hear it in his voice, or, you know, there was times where he'd wake up at 3 a.m. up here in New Jersey and drive to our farm and be there before I even woke up to train us. And, you know, he just loved horses. He loved seeing us succeed. And he was just passionate about his coaching and everything he did.
Throughout your association with Michael Barisone, did you ever witness him mistreating another person?
Never, no. I mean, there's coaching any athlete, I think, you know, in sports, there's times where your voice would get elevated or you might use a curse word, but, you know, I think it was definitely, in my experiences, is just because of how much he wanted you to improve, but there was never abusive or anything like that.
No further questions.
All right, any cross-examination?
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Martin, you weren't at Mr. Barisone's farm on August 7th, 2019?
No.
And you're aware that he's on trial for attempted murder?
Yes.
No questions, Judge. Thank you.
All right, you may step down, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
I call your next witness.
Defense calls Dr. Steven Simmering.
Dr. Simring.
Hi, Doctor. Left hand on the Bible, please. Raise your right hand as my clerk will swear you in.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the testimony you give to this court regarding this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Steven with a V, Simmering, Simring.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. You may have a seat.
Thank you.
Please keep your voice up nice and loud.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead, direct examination.
Just wait till the doctor gets settled. Good morning, doctor.
Morning.
Where do you reside currently, doctor?
Reside in Tenafly, New Jersey.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a psychiatrist.
And can you give us a little bit of background with regards to your education?
Yeah, psychiatry is a specialty of medicine. I went to college at Columbia. I went to medical school at NYU. I did my general surgery residency at Bellevue Hospital, and then I did a psychiatric residency at Columbia Presbyterian, New York State Psychiatric Institute. After that, I was in the U.S. Army Medical Corps for 3 years.
And what did you do in the U.S. Army?
I treated psychiatric patients who were military, usually Vietnam, people coming back and forth from Vietnam.
Okay.
Returned then to New Jersey. I became the medical director of Mount Carmel Guild Community Mental Health Center, which is part of Catholic Charities. I did that for about 3 years, and then I joined what was then called New Jersey Medical School, now known as Rutgers. And for the next, almost 30 years, I was director of medical student education at New Jersey Medical School in Newark. At times, I was vice chair of the department. I ran the residency training program, but I was usually in charge of medical student education. After that, I returned to Columbia, where I still am, and I directed the forensic or legal psychiatry training program at Columbia. Throughout all this time, I've been in private practice of psychiatry, where I've seen individual patients for therapy, and I've also done forensic or legal evaluations.
And approximately how many patients have you seen and evaluated over your career?
I've seen thousands of cases.
And how long have you been in psychiatry?
Well, I finished my residency in psychiatry in 1970. Then I went to the Army. And then in 1973, I received board certification. So I'm a board certified psychiatrist.
And can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what board certified means?
Well, psychiatry is a specialty of medicine like surgery or radiology. In order to do that, you need to graduate from medical school and finish an approved residency. After that, there's an examination to measure your qualification. And I passed that examination in 1973 and became board certified. Oddly enough, it's lifetime certification. Nowadays, people have to do it every 10 years to take recertification. However, I didn't get away with it because in 1994, they developed a subspecialty in forensic or legal psychiatry, and I passed that board, and that board is renewable every 10 years. So board certification means that after completing all the requirements, an established board of experts will evaluate your capability and competency.
Now, do you have any, or have you been appointed to any university in the board?
Well, yes. I mean, when I was at New Jersey Medical School, I sat on many of the committees. I was there for many years, and my work mainly involved students. At Columbia, the same thing. I was involved with residents and the training of residents. As part of my Columbia job, I also train residents at Cornell. Cornell has a partnership with Columbia through New York Presbyterian Hospital. So I spent much of my life in academic medicine, and at the same time, I've seen private patients throughout this whole time.
Did you have any hospital appointments?
Yes, I have a hospital. Well, for many years I was appointed to University Hospital in Newark, which is part of UMBNJ, or New Jersey Med School, again now called Rutgers. They keep changing the names. Since 2005, when I returned to Columbia, I received an appointment at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, known as New York Presbyterian Columbia, and then I received an appointment at New York Presbyterian Weill Cornell. That's the East Side Hospital. They have a partnership in New York Presbyterian Hospital. So I have 2 hospital appointments.
Have you received any awards or honors with regards to your work in psychiatry?
Most of the awards I've received over the years have been teaching awards.
How about any committee assignments?
Well, that's part of academia, as you serve on committees. Everybody serves on committees, so you don't get much credit for it, but part of the duties in academia is serving on committees.
Do you have any specific research interests that you've pursued?
Medical student education.
Now, have you written any articles?
Written a few, not that many over the years. They're listed in my CV.
Any books? Authored any books?
Yeah, I've written a few books. They're more in the field of popular psychiatry more than academic psychiatry. For example, I co-authored the book Making Marriage Work for Dummies, of all things, as part of the Dummies series. I wrote The Compatibility Quotient, co-authored that. This has to do with marriage. I wrote a book with now the current dean of New Jersey Medical School, Robert Johnson, a book called The Race Trap. And this really has to do, back 20 years ago, about black-white race relations. He's African-American, so we had it from the point of view of a black and a white doctor. We're going to revise that book because race relations have so totally changed in the United States. I've written a few other books.
Doctor, have you ever been qualified as an expert in a court of law?
I have many times.
And when you say many times, approximately how many times?
Probably hundreds of times. Most of the time, I've been qualified in the state of New Jersey. I should have mentioned I'm licensed in New Jersey and New York. I have an inactive license in California. So that in New Jersey and New York, I practice mainly in New Jersey, occasionally in New York, and of course my appointment at Columbia and Cornell is in New York. I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
I think you answered it. Let me ask another one.
Thank you.
Have you ever testified as an expert on behalf of the state.
Oh, yeah.
To the prosecutor.
Thank you. I was telling you about testifying. Most of my testimony has been in Superior Court in the state of New Jersey. I've occasionally testified in Supreme Court in New York, which is the equivalent of Superior Court. They have a nutty kind of way of naming courts there. So their Supreme Court is like our Superior Court. I've testified in federal court, mainly in the state of New Jersey, occasionally in New York. That's called the U.S. District Court. I've testified at arbitration hearings as well. I've testified occasionally out of state in psychiatry. And I've been qualified. So I've been retained often by, I do civil and criminal cases. In criminal cases, I've been retained by defense, lawyers like you, by the prosecutor. I've worked for Mr. Shelhorn's office, and I've worked for many of the prosecutors' offices in the state of New Jersey. I've been retained or appointed by judges to do specific tasks. So I've been retained by people from lawyers and judges from all sides.
And you indicated that you've been retained by the Morris County Prosecutor's Office in the past?
Oh, I have, yes.
On one or more occasions?
On comes and goes. I've testified in most of the counties in the state. I've been retained by many of the prosecutors' offices, public defenders' offices, and private attorneys. In Morris County, I did a lot of cases when Michael Murphy was the county prosecutor at that time.
Where?
Here in Morris. Here in Morris. And Judge Michael Murphy was the prosecutor at that time. After him, I started doing fewer cases here, more cases in Bergen and Essex. But over the years, I've done Morris County cases.
Now, Judge, at this point, I'll move Dr. Simring as an expert in psychiatry.
Forensic psychiatry, right?
Correct.
Yes? All right. Any objection, or do you have any questions for the doctor solely related to his qualifications as an expert?
No, Judge. Thank you.
All right, very good. Dr. Simring will be qualified by the court as an expert pursuant to Rule 702, based on his training, his knowledge, his education, skill, and experience. He has been qualified before, and he'll be qualified this time as an expert in the area of forensic psychiatry, and he'll be allowed to render his opinion.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. You're welcome, Doctor. Go ahead, Mr.
Can
Blinkus.
you explain to the jury what forensic psychiatry is?
Well, forensic psychiatry is a subspecialty of psychiatry, just as psychiatry is a subspecialty of medicine. It's a discipline, and I have been qualified as an expert in psychiatry with a subspecialty in forensic psychiatry. Forensic psychiatry is the application of the specialty of psychiatry to specifically to legal issues. And legal issues come in a lot of varieties. Many of them are civil cases where one person is suing another and brings up a psychiatric issue. A simple example of that may be a will contest, where the state of mind of the testator or the will maker is brought into question. Some of these cases have to do with claims of damages, medical malpractice, or sexual harassment, or things like that. Then there are criminal cases, such as this one. And in a criminal case, I will render opinions as to an individual's state of mind, an individual's dangerousness from a psychiatric point of view, an individual's competency or fitness to stand trial, and other factors dealing with an individual's state of mind as it applies to the criminal charges. And as I've testified, I've been retained by defense, prosecution, and the court to render these opinions.
Doctor, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist?
The training is very different. For the purpose of testifying, psychologists can do very much what I do in telling the jury, giving the jury expert opinions about a person's state of mind. However, the training is very, very different. Psychiatry is a specialty of medicine. You can't go into psychiatry unless you go to medical school. You know, the old joke was a psychiatrist is a doctor who doesn't like to see blood. And, you know, that's a little bit funny, but it is a specialty as surgery, internal medicine, gynecology, any other specialty. Psychology is an academic study, and instead of getting an MD degree and specializing as you do in psychiatry, you will aim toward a PhD degree, or a PSYD, PsyD degree, and you get an academic degree, and then you take courses, and then you become a specialist in psychiatric issues. So although the training is very different, they often converge in two places. One place is that psychiatrists and psychologists both often provide therapy, so both can be qualified to be psychiatric therapists. Second thing is both psychiatrists and psychologists can do evaluations. I think the one place in which psychiatry has an advantage in doing evaluations is in questions of medication, where medication is concerned, because part of my training is training in the use and prescription of medications. The one place where psychology has an advantage is in testing, pen and paper psychological testing, where they have an advantage.
Doctor, were you retained to evaluate Michael Barisone's state of mind at the time of this incident?
I was asked to see Mr. Barisone shortly after, really within a month of the incident, which occurred in early August 2019.
Now, is there any significance as to when you see a particular individual as far as the closeness to the event with regards to rendering an opinion?
Well, ideally, you want to do an evaluation as close to the event as possible because it's fresh and everything is fresh. The ideal circumstance is getting a call from an attorney to see his client in jail or really in some kind of custody or in the office. It would be great to see somebody shortly afterwards. That often doesn't happen. Very often, because of the way the court system works, I'm asked to see somebody months or even years after an event, and then I have to reconstruct what had happened. That's certainly possible, but it makes it more difficult. Here, in this case, I was asked to see Mr. Barisone the first time on September 6, 2019, which is just a tiny bit more than a month after the incident.
Okay, and again, on that day you met with Michael Barisone, correct?
I did.
And that was in person, correct?
Yes, it was. That was just before the it was just before the pandemic, yes.
And after the pandemic, did you have an occasion to meet with him on other occasions?
I met with Mr. Barisone 4 more times throughout the year 2020, all of which were done by Zoom. By that time, much of my evaluations were being done by Zoom, like most other mental health professionals.
Right. Did you interview anyone else other than Michael Barisone to formulate your opinion in this matter?
Yes, I'd had telephone interviews. First, I read all the records, statements made by many, many people, including Michael Barisone's girlfriend, Mary Haskins Clark. I've read statements by the victim in this case, her boyfriend, people involved in her life. I spoke by phone specifically to 2 people. One is Steven Tarshis, who is Mr. Barisone's long-term lawyer, and he was involved in trying unsuccessfully to put a stop to what was going on between Mr. Barisone and Ms. Kanarek.
If I can stop you for a second, Doc. Why did you contact Steven Tarshis as Michael Barisone's attorney to talk to him?
This is a complicated case, as I'm sure the jury knows, but one of the issues was that as time went by, Mr. Barisone was trying everything within his power to stop the relationship between him and Kanarek and Goodwin. In other words, he wanted them off his property, and he wanted them to leave. They didn't want to leave. That's the simple part of it. So he wanted them to leave. They were squatting. They didn't want to leave. They claimed they had a right to be there. So Mr. Barisone tried everything in his power to get them to leave. And among other things, he contacted the Washington Township police on at least 4 occasions, and probably more than that, and asked for the help.
Hold on a second. Can I see counsel at sidebar, please? I guess that testimony was not exactly responsive, so please ask another question.
Dr.
And I'm not sure we have to get into why he spoke to someone, because that probably led the doctor to testify as he did. So he certainly indicated who he spoke to, that's fine, but why he did it, information he received from those people is not something he should testify to now.
As far as,
The
Thank you.
witness was just asking where the other jurors were. I said in the front.
Oh, yes, in
Thank
the
you.
first two rows.
Thank you, Your Honor.
COVID protocols.
A little disoriented during COVID.
Understood.
I don't know who I'm
We
talking
haven't,
to.
we haven't all of a sudden in criminal cases reduced a jury to 7 jurors.
I didn't think so, Your
I should
Honor.
have made that clear at the outset.
Thank you, sir.
We have 16, including the first 2 rows.
Thank you.
All right.
Didn't want to ignore the rest. Thank you.
Understood.
Doctor, I see that you're referring to your report. I'm just going to give you a copy.
Hold on, Mr. Belinkis. There's an issue with the court smoke recording. All right, we're good. Go ahead, Mr. Belinkis.
Just so the record is clear, I've marked a copy of your report D900E-1, which I'll place here. So if you're referring to your report, which is not a problem, just indicate so, and that's the exhibit number that has been marked.
Thank you. I have my own copy, Mr. Blinkus.
Now, you indicated you spoke to the attorney, Stephen Parkes. Did you speak to anyone else with regards to Michael Barisone that you used and relied on as far as your evaluation?
Yes, I spoke to his long-term therapist who has seen him in therapy for years, and it's Miss Picardo. I'm looking at her first name. I'm blocking on that.
I'm going to refer you to the first page of your report, second paragraph, ask you to review that.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, thank you. Ann Picardo. Sorry. I spoke to Ann Picardo. Mr. Barisone had been seeing Ann Picardo for therapy off and on for many years. So with Mr. Barisone's permission, I spoke to Ms. Picardo to gather her thoughts about his background.
And did you receive information from Picardo that you relied on with regards to the formulation of your opinion?
I did.
And can you tell the jury what information she provided you that you relied on as far as your evaluation here?
Well, I'm not sure how much detail you want me to go into.
Whatever detail that you relied on and you believe is necessary to explain why you rendered the opinion that you did.
Okay.
If I can refer you to page 15.
Thank you. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Sorry, those are the past personal history. What I learned from her is that he came from a family which was emotionally and physically abusive. That as a boy growing up, his mother, according to her, was very selfish and very abusive to him. His mother, by the way, passed away in 2014. His father died in 2019, just after his arrest. Ms. Picardo remembered that in terms of the history, that one of the maternal grandparents suffered from depression, and she believed that one of the grandparents required shock treatment, electroconvulsive therapy.
And why is that relevant, Doc?
Well, depression runs in families, and one of my diagnoses, of my 2 diagnoses, one of them is persistent depressive disorder or chronic depression.
And so that was relevant with regards to your diagnosis regarding the depressive diagnosis?
That's correct. Just one more piece of evidence. People with depression often have depressions in the family. Some do not. Many do.
All right, and what else, if anything, did you rely on?
She told me, and this is even more important, Ms. Picardo said that she had treated Mr. Barisone on and off for 20 years. Never consistently, but on and off for depression and anxiety. And he would make appointments with her and see her when he felt he needed care. She described him to me as, this is a direct quote, very troubled. She thought he was at a considerable risk for suicide, and she believed that even before the current events. He expressed to her, after he spoke to her after the incident, that he had lost everything. She also noted that throughout the years, in addition to being depressed, he appeared to be paranoid, by which she meant unduly suspicious of the motives of others.
And how is that information relevant to your diagnosis?
Well, my diagnosis is based on my review of the records, which are extensive, my review of the medical records, the incident reports, my 5 interviews with Mr. Barisone, and also other information that comes through, such as medical records and impressions from other treating professionals. All that helps me to formulate a diagnosis.
Now, can you set forth generally what you reviewed that you relied on that formed your opinion?
Yes, the material's extensive, as the jury can see from this pile of papers on my desk that's more than 8 inches thick. But just to summarize it, I had, and I'm reading now from my report where I summarized everything, the legal documents, Washington Township investigation reports, which had to do with the current incident, and visits that Washington Township made to Mr. Barisone before the incident, dealing with difficulties he was having with Ms. Canarak and Ms. Goodwin.
Doctor, did you review the reports with regards to Michael Barisone's 911 calls to Washington Township?
I did. There were several. There were at least 4 911 calls in which, in the days before the shooting incident, in which Mr. Barisone was increasingly panicky and increasingly desperate to get help for a situation which had been spinning out of control. And he put these in the form of 911 calls. Officers responded to the scene, but didn't do very much.
And what, if any, impact did that have on Michael Barisone's state of mind during this?
Mr. Belinkas, can I see you for a minute?
Doctor, with regards to the numerous times that Michael Barisone contacted the Washington Police Department and called 911, did you discuss with him his feelings and beliefs with regards to those interactions with the police?
Yes. I did not discuss it with the police. I discussed the reports with Mr. Barisone.
And what did Michael Barisone tell you with regards to these numerous attempts to try to get the town to assist him?
Mr. Barisone said he was scared to death of Lauren Canarak, and he wanted help in any way he could get it, that he had tried everything he knew, calling his lawyer, calling the police, trying to speak directly to Lauren Canarak and her father Jonathan, speaking to Goodwin, speaking through intermediaries on the farm, but nothing worked. And in the last several days, prior to the shooting itself, he implored the police for their help in putting an end to the situation.
Okay, focusing specifically just on his contact with the police, what impact did that have on his mental state, if any?
Well, Mr. Barisone became increasingly desperate because he saw himself in a situation in which he was being physically threatened by Lauren Canarak and Robert Goodwin. He felt trapped. He felt that there was no way out. Despite the fact that he owned a farm, that he had a reputation, that he had funds, that he had education. He felt that he was unable to do anything to make this situation go away and to get Lauren Canarac to leave.
Now, in your interviews with Michael Barisone, did you have any difficulty communicating with him at any point?
Well, yes, the difficulty I had communicating with him is he went into incredible detail about everything. And it was very hard to pin him down to try to get a trend of what he was thinking. He would answer the question and then he would go off on showing me posts that Lauren Canarac did on Facebook with all kinds of fantastic threats, stories about chess games, stories about other people, and it was hard to focus him on what his actual thinking was because he was so preoccupied with Canarac and remained preoccupied even after the shooting and even after his arrest.
And he was he that same way in each and every meeting that you had?
He was. Now, he was worst when I first saw him. I first saw him within a month, a little more than a month after the shooting. I then saw him 4 times in fairly close proximity in April of 2020. So by that time, 2 years had passed, a year had passed. And he had improved a little bit, but he remained focused, and he remained, he wouldn't stop talking about what happened and what Lauren Canarac was doing and what she was still doing. He wouldn't stop writing. He was continuing to demonstrate, to produce documents saying all the things that she did to him and all the things he was afraid that she would do to him. It reached a point where I said to him that I cannot process all this information. Would you please restrict it to 100 pages? I rarely have to do that with somebody. Usually with examinees and with patients, I want them to produce everything they can. But with him, I said, I cannot read thousands of pages. I want you to boil this down. And he finally did produce for me a 91-page document with the high points.
Now, I show you what has been marked Defense Exhibit 900E-3. Is this a copy of that
Yes.
document you asked Michael Barisone to produce?
Right, this is the 91-page document. It wasn't numbered, so when I reviewed this with you, Mr. Belinkus, we numbered the pages for easy reference. I have my own copy.
Okay, now, did you review and rely on what's contained in that document in formulating your opinion?
Yes, among other things. I don't think I ever finished my last question about the materials that I reviewed.
Okay, please finish.
And I started by saying I reviewed the Washington Township police reports, both during the investigation of the shooting itself and the 4 visits the Washington Township police made to Mr. Barisone prior to the shootings, where he was imploring their help in solving the situation. I reviewed investigation reports by the Morris County Prosecutor's Office. I reviewed reports by local police. I reviewed the indictment, criminal complaint, the search warrant. I reviewed documents that had to do with trying to obtain. Mr. Barisone was convinced that bugs had been placed, listening devices, had been placed throughout the farm. So he retained a private firm called Bug Sweeps to try to figure out where these bugs were and what they were recording. I obtained medical records, and this had to do with the emergency room visit, the emergency squad that came out to the farm after the shooting, and they took Ms. Canarac to the hospital. They also took Mr. Barisone, who had been injured himself in the episode. I read the notes from the emergency responders who were first on the scene to gather their impression of what things were happening. I read the doctor reports from Mr. Canarac and Mr. Barisone. Then finally, I read an extensive file of correspondence, text messages, and social media posts, largely from Lauren Canarac, but others as well. And the bulk of this lengthy pile of documents that you have here have to do with these posts. and text messages.
Was it brought to your attention that there were over 19,000 pages of social media posts from Lauren Cataract?
Oh, well, yes, that's why I told Mr. Barisone, there is no way you're going to get me to read 19,000 pages. I have better things to do. If you want me to do this, you're going to have to boil this down to 100 pages, and then I'll read it. That's pretty unusual, because normally in cases I kind of scrounge for every scrap of relevant material I could get, but there was so much of this stuff.
Now, was Michael Barisone ever able, in any of your meetings with him, was he ever able to discuss the specific incident with you?
Well, he talked about what happened up until the time he jumped into his truck and drove down to the place where Lauren Cataract and Robert Goodwin were residing. He remembered nothing about the incident itself, and then he talked about the aftermath.
So as far as the actual incident, he was never able to give you any specific details each and every time you talked to him?
That is correct. He gave me no details, and he gave law enforcement no details.
Now, you did realize that he is charged with a criminal offense, correct?
Absolutely.
And did his, and I'm going to describe it as amnesia with regards to that portion of the events, cause you any concerns? And if so, what did you do to address those concerns?
Well, not at all. He got hit on the head, which is probably the most likely reason that he lost memory. During the confrontation, it happened very quickly, and what happened is not very clear. But one of the things seemed to be that Robert Goodwin hit him on the head with his cell phone, and he suffered a hematoma behind his ear and some other head injuries. That's the most likely reason that he lost his memory. However, your question has more to do with his current fitness to stand trial. Does he remember enough to stand trial? And my answer to that is absolutely, because he can provide the entire background. He can provide details of all the interactions between him, Cataract, Goodwin, and all the other relevant principals, and he can account for what happened afterwards. The fact that he got hit on the head and don't remember the shooting itself does not undermine his ability to stand trial, and does not undermine my ability to make a determination about what his mental state was, because there was abundant evidence of his mental state leading up to the actual shooting.
Now, with regards to his inability to recall the specific events, you've indicated that the blows to his head may very well be the cause of that, correct?
Probably. I mean, there's another possibility. When people are in periods of high anxiety, as he was terrified when he jumped into the car. As far as I could tell, he grabbed a pistol. He owned guns, but he grabbed a pistol. It's kind of a lady's pistol, a pink pistol, referred to as a lady's pistol, that belonged to his friend Dr. Ruth Cox. And he did it very impulsively, jumped into his car, drove down there, and according to him, he was afraid he'd be killed and wanted to defend himself. Now, when people are in states of high anxiety like that, like anybody can remember, like being, say, in a car accident or being the victim of a crime, sometimes memory is not completely clear for everything that happens because anxiety is so high. However, I think the most simple explanation is he got hit on the head.
Okay. Now, can you say definitively, to a degree of medical certainty, what the specific cause was, either the head injury or the mental state caused by anxiety?
Well, Counselor, as you well know, I can't say anything definitively. I can offer an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical probability, which means that it's highly likely medically. I can't testify as to anything into certainty. Also, there are data missing here about exactly what happened, and I read all the witness statements to try to put it all together. I think the most likely explanation for his amnesia is he got hit on the head. And it's well known and well documented that he got hit on the head. I've read reports from Morristown Memorial documenting all of his injuries. I think there is also the possibility that his enormous, overwhelming state of anxiety may have affected his memory. That's the best I can tell you.
Okay, now, did you review any documents with regards to Michael Barisone's state of mind immediately after the incident that you relied on in helping you form that opinion that you just testified to?
Well, yes, there were many observers, mainly the trained observers from the emergency squad, emergency medical services, and everybody described the same thing. He was oriented to person and place. In other words, he knew he was Michael Barisone, and he knew that he was on his farm, so he knew that. However, every observer commented that he was confused about what had just happened. Every observer who saw him, there must have been a dozen observers on the scene, in the hospital emergency room, in the emergency bay, at the hospital. Everybody commented that he was confused about what actually happened. And actually, to this day, not to this day, but to the last time I saw him in April of 2020, he still did not remember exactly what happened. He remembered what led to it. He remembered having the visitors from Child Protective Services. He remembered jumping into his truck. He remembered being threatened, and he remembered being treated for injuries, but did not remember what happened in between. Now, that's different from knowing who he is or where he is. He did know who he is and where he was.
Now, did you have discussions with Michael Barisone with regards to various social media posts?
I had extensive discussions with him about media posts, and the media posts were almost all done by Lauren Canarak. Some of them were old media posts where she had posted comments about other individuals, often very negative comments about other individuals. I discussed that with him.
If I can stop you there, Doc. I'm going to show you what has been marked D900E-4, which is a social media post from a woman named Staggart and Cat.
Judge, I'm going to object. This is what we talked about this
I'm
morning.
not getting into the details.
Then why are you showing it to him then? You're not getting into the details which the court excluded. Why even show it to him? Doesn't that run the risk of an improper comment?
No, because I thought you told me I could leave here.
Not as to the details. That was part of my
I'm
ruling
not
this
asking
morning.
any details, Judge.
All right, go ahead. Just be careful.
Doctor, I'm showing you 900E-4 and 5. For the record, there are posts from Canarak to Staggart and from Canarak to Parkinson. Do not say what's contained in here.
I've seen these posts.
And did you discuss these posts with Michael Barisone?
I did.
And without discussing the content, how would you describe these posts?
Objection.
You're asking this doctor's opinion on it?
How
Well,
did Michael Barisone
it's
describe
exactly.
these posts to you without referring to the content?
He found them very scary.
What effect did those posts, based on your discussions with Michael Barisone, have on his mental state?
These were just more pieces of more bricks, more pieces in a building fear that he had of Lauren Canarak. He became increasingly terrified of Miss Canarak, and increasingly terrified of what he believed Lauren Canarak could do to him and to his girlfriend Mary Haskins Gray. And over the time, certainly over the last month or two prior to the incident, he became increasingly terrified of what he regarded as Lauren's power to destroy him, to destroy Mary Haskins Gray, to destroy his farm, to destroy Mary Haskins Gray's family. And these posts were simply more links to build up this terror. I can't point to any one post and say this is what did it, but there was an ongoing series of posts which he found increasingly terrifying.
And is it your opinion that each and every post, to a certain degree, played a role in his decline of his mental state?
Absolutely, it was a buildup. He became increasingly terrified and increasingly paranoid.
Did you discuss with Michael Barisone Lauren Canarak's post about going to war?
Yes.
I'm going to show you Exhibit 200A-85, 200A-25, and 200A-84. Can you review these and tell me if these are some of the posts that you discussed with Michael Barisone with regards to Canarak's posting about going to war?
Yes, these the most relevant thing about these posts are they all occurred in late July 2019, which is within a couple of weeks of the incident.
And what effect did those posts have on Michael Barisone?
There's no single post that I could say did any single thing. It was a buildup and continued to play on his fears. He became increasingly panicky. If you take any one post out of context, you may say, gee, maybe this is a joke, or gee, maybe this is a game. But at this point, he had begun to take these posts extremely seriously and literally, and believed that she had power to do all of these things that she was threatening to do in the posts. So with each one, it turned up the ratchet of the pressure, and Mr. Barisone became increasingly distraught, increasingly frightened.
Can you have those?
Sure. I have all these. You can have those as well.
Can I see those?
Doctor, I'm not going to go over each and every post.
Thank God.
Did you discuss with Michael Barisone the post where Lauren Canarak talked about having...
Judge, can I ask that the witness not be led?
I'm trying not to get...
Well,
Can we be heard at sidebar?
sure. Rephrase your question, please, in this regard.
Doctor, I'm going to show you Exhibit 200A-36, 200A-53, 200A-63, and 200A-62 with regards to
Thank you.
weapons and guns.
Yes.
Can you just look at all of them quickly?
I'm familiar with that. I've read all this.
Right. And what impact did those posts have on Michael Barisone's mental state?
Well, it's the same thing. First of all, you have to look at the dates of these posts. Some of them are much earlier, in April of 2018. So some of this goes back much before the actual incident. So in the first set of posts, and I won't go into reading any of these things, they're all threatening. They all have to do with guns. They have to do with with weapons, with robbery, with you can take all of it literally, but all of it has a threatening aspect to it. So the first set of posts, the important thing is, this was April of 2018. This is more than a year before the incident. The second set of
Can we be
posts.
heard at sidebar?
Can I see you, Mr. All right, Mr. Belinkus, proceed in accordance with the court's decision at the bench, please.
Doctor, did you discuss with Michael Barisone posts from Lauren Canarak where she talks about mental health issues on her behalf?
Yes.
Did you discuss with him specific posts that he saw prior to the shooting with regards to Lauren Canarak and her mental health issues?
Yes, counsel, I've discussed many of them. After a while, I had to stop the discussion because he would have kept me there all day showing me posts. And it just reaches a point where it's no point. Yes, to your answer, he did discuss specific posts about her mental health and alleged mental health issues.
Judge, I think this is one of the topics I had asked if there could be a limited instruction about.
Yes. I was going to give some limiting instructions at the end of the testimony before your cross-examination. Or would you rather me give it now?
No, Judge, if you're inclined to give it at the end, I
Right,
would be.
because there's a number of different topics. I don't want to keep interrupting
Yes.
any more than I already have.
Understood, Judge.
What's necessary. I'll give the limiting instructions at the end of the direct about any topics covered that deserve a limiting instruction, and I'll include it in my final charge as well.
Doctor, I'm going to show you Defense Exhibit 200A-77 and 200A-1 and ask you if you reviewed these with Michael Barisone.
Want these back?
Yep. Did you review those with Michael Barisone?
Can I see those?
Yes, I did. Yeah, and the first thing I look at, especially with all these records, is the date is the most important thing. And you've given me a handful of messages, some of which were April of 2019, which would have been 4 months or so before the incident, and the others were a few days before the incident in August of 2019.
And did Michael Barisone indicated that he was researching Lauren Canarak at any time?
Yes.
And did he indicate that he was,
Judge, I'm going to object. These are leading questions.
I'll allow it in this area, just to get to the point.
did he indicate that he was pulling up all her Facebook posts from previous periods of time?
He was.
And with regards to those ones you have before you, how did Michael Barisone, how did those posts affect Michael Barisone's state of mind?
He became increasingly panicky. He became obsessed with her posts, preoccupied with her writing, and the more he dug into it, the more panicky he became.
At some point in time, did you discuss with Michael Barisone his belief that he was being recorded?
Yes.
And what discussions did you have with Michael Barisone concerning that, and what effect did it have on his mental state?
Well, he was being recorded. In fact, he hired, as I've testified to the jury earlier, what's called a bug sweeping service. I saw documentation of individual professionals who go around trying to find listening devices, and they did indeed find some listening devices. And in fact, I believe that Lauren Canarak acknowledged placing listening devices. And some of the comments that he made in private in his own residence somehow got back to him in terms of a Facebook post or something like that. And he became increasingly anxious and panicky when he saw some of the things he was talking about in the quiet of his home was being put on Facebook, probably through listening devices. That increased his panic and sense of desperation.
Did he know 100% for sure, based on your conversations with him, that he was being recorded initially?
Counsel, nobody knows anything 100% for sure, including your client.
And what effect, from a mental standpoint, did his belief that he was being recording have on, if any, on his mental decline?
It poured fuel on the fire. He had, as more and more posts were taking place, and more of these events, more and more things getting back to him, the bugging, everything else like that, he was being, I guess in a colloquial word, gaslighted, that his reality was being toyed with. And he became increasingly panicky, and the more panicky he got, the less rational he got in dealing with things.
Now, you just
And this, in the context, is a man who, despite his background of depression, is a man who has always been a very rational person. He was no longer rational.
Now, you used the term gaslighting. Can you explain to the jury what that means?
Well,
In
it's not a proper psychiatric term in the DSM, but it's one commonly used. And it's a term that it started really from an old movie of a man trying to play with his girlfriend or his wife's reality by turning on and off a gaslight. I forgot the details. But the idea is where somebody, it often happens in the context of a romantic relationship, but it can be other relationships like this one, where one individual tries to play with another individual's reality by inserting facts, changing facts, doing things, changing things, and where the individual bites as it were, and accepts this, that's called gaslighting, where they start questioning their own sense of reality, where they no longer know, they're like adrift at sea. They no longer know what the guideposts are about reality. And that was what was being happening to him. And therefore, looking at more, 19,000 posts, my God, I mean, all he did all day and all night is read these posts. And instead of reassuring him, it made him even more panicky.
Did you discuss with Michael Barisone, Lauren Cataract posting things saying that her life was in danger or threatened by Michael Barisone?
Yes.
And did you discuss that with Michael Barisone?
I discussed all of it with him up to the point that I couldn't take it anymore. And I said, enough. The session is finished. I don't want any more. And then I would see him again. I stopped after 4 sessions because it was no longer productive. I would just hear the same stuff and more posts and more posts. And what you're seeing here on my desk is only a small sample of the posts. There is this kind of, oddly enough, there's an old psychiatric concept called hypergraphia, where some people who, when they're anxious, write all the time for everything. In today's world, it's more like hyperpostia. That Lauren Cataract, I mean, she's not the only one in the world who does this for sure, but everything got posted. There were countless numbers of posts.
I'm going to show you D702.
Let me give these back to you.
Did you review that document?
Yeah, this is a document from USA Bug Sweeps. I guess there is such a profession called bug sweeping. And this is a contract that Mr. Barisone paid $5,000 to this bug sweeping company to check out his rather large property, a farm and stables, to try to find bugs or listening devices. And they followed through on that contract.
Now, what effect did that have on Michael Barisone?
He got increasingly paranoid. The more he did to try to assure himself, the worse things got. Because the more he investigated, the more he found, and the more panicky he got. And nobody seemed to be able to stop it. But I'm saying nobody, I'm talking about his loved ones. Nobody seemed to be able to stop it. Everybody noticed that he was no longer the same person, that he had become depressed, preoccupied, strange, odd. But in his own mind, he thought the solution to this was investigating further and further and further. But the more he looked, the worse things got. It was like a house of mirrors.
Did you discuss with Michael Barisone him hiring a private investigator to do a background check of Canarak and Goodwin?
He did. Yet one more futile effort to try to reassure himself. He hired a private investigator who did some kind of background check of Canarak and Goodwin. When I say some kind, I never saw a formal report. Excuse me. But mainly, they found some records in North Carolina.
Okay. I'm going to lead you through this next series of questions. I'm going to show you D.
He said he never saw the report.
You saw this, Judge.
He just said he never saw the report.
Doctor, did you see a background check that Michael Barisone got with regards to Canarak and Goodwin?
Counselor, I said I never saw a formal report. What I saw are random records of arrests in North Carolina and some comments from the investigator. But I never saw a formal report in the sense of a formal investigation report.
Okay. I'm going to show you D700A1. Is this the informal report that you reviewed with regards to?
Mr. Belinkus, he never said he saw an informal report.
Is this the report that you
He
saw?
never said he saw a report. He said he saw random records and comments by the investigator.
These are the records he's referring to, I believe.
Well, let him answer that.
Okay.
Answer is, excuse me, correct. These are records that have to do with traffic
Okay,
records. Okay, I'm sorry.
You can't discuss the content. Are these the records that you reviewed with regards to what was provided to Michael Barisone?
These and a few others, yes.
Now, these records indicate that there were numerous arrests for both individuals, correct? Just yes or no?
I don't know how to categorize numerous.
More than one?
More than one, yes, Your Honor.
And did you discuss those records and Michael Barisone's beliefs with regards to his review of those records?
Yes, and his mounting panic. And these records were more embers in the fire.
Did you discuss with Michael Barisone him hiring a person to sit outside of the stable area at night and guard the stable area?
He did. I believe that was Larry Davidson.
And is that also something that fueled?
Well, yes, everything he tried to do, which on the surface would provide some level of protection against his perception of danger, only increased the danger and made it even worse.
Did you discuss with Michael?
Can I see counsel outside one, please?
Doctor, with regards to your testimony concerning increased danger, was that Michael Barisone's impression of what was going on?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to show you 4 posts. Defense Exhibit 200A, 83, A81, 900E6, and 900E7.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to take a look at these. Are these 4 postings from Lauren Canarac postings that you specifically talked to Michael Barisone about?
Again, I'm looking at dates. Yes, these are loosely called Manifesto 1, 2, 3, and 4. I
And
spoke
who
about
gave,
that.
who gave him that terminology?
Lauren Canarac.
Now, with regards to these posts and your discussions with Michael Barisone, can you tell the jury how these specific posts affected his mental state?
He believed all this stuff. As Ms. Canarac was gaslighting him, he believed it. And although many of the things in these posts I find fantastic, he believed it, and he believed it literally. And he believed that all of these things presented a danger to him and to his family. And with each post, it turned up the screws and made him more anxious and more panicky.
Did you discuss with Michael Barisone why he left his residence and started living in the stables?
Yes, it was sort of a complex story, but apparently a report had been made to the town inspection facilities reporting on unsafe conditions within the dwelling. And there were 2 dwellings on there, and at that time he was sharing one of the dwellings with Canarac and Goodwin. But there was a report made, and it had to do with unsafe conditions. I never could get that exactly straight. There had been a burst pipe at one point. There was some question about how many people were living in the dwelling and if there was adequate septic tank coverage for that. But whatever it was, the bottom line was Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Barisone believed that he had been reported to the town by Canarac and Goodwin. I'm not sure who reported the town, but he believed Canarac and Goodwin did that. In any event, the town came and they closed the facility, said it was uninhabitable until remediated, and he had to leave, as did Canarac and Goodwin. And they had to, fortunately it was middle of the summer, and they had to sleep outdoors while he remediated these problems.
Okay, and can you describe what, if any, impact Barisone having to live outside had on his mental state?
Well, it was playing with his mind even more. He no longer could be in familiar surroundings. He was outdoors. Things had becoming increasingly strange and disorienting for him.
On the day of the incident, did you review any documents with regards to DCPP coming to the farm area?
I did. It's DCP&P. It's what DIFUS is called nowadays in New Jersey, basically Child Protective. Apparently, a report had been filed with Child Protective that children, these were children of Mary Haskins Gray, Mr. Barisone, not his children, but her children, who had visited the farm from time to time. And these documents made a report, an anonymous report, because these reports are always anonymous, that these children were in some kind of danger. And that was my understanding, that one or two representatives of DCP&P, Division of Child Protective and Permanency, came down to visit and wanted to question Mr. Barisone about these allegations of abuse of these children.
Now, did you discuss that with Michael Barisone?
I did.
What did he specifically tell you with regards to that contact with DCPP?
It was the final straw.
what effect do you believe that had on Michael Barisone's state of mind?
It was the final straw.
Now, when you do an evaluation, Doc, can you explain to the jury how you come to what your opinion is?
Well, evaluation is a formal exercise. What you do is, it starts with the review of records. And depending on the evaluation, the records could be really very brief, maybe one report, or they could be very lengthy, like in this case. So I spend a lot of time reviewing the records. So before I even meet the examinee, I'm familiar with the records. And records generally tend to be police reports, hospital records, medical records, investigation reports. There can be any kind of relevant records. This case was a little unusual because the bulk of the records were actually Facebook postings, largely from Lord Canarac. But background could be anything, could be military records, whatever the records are that is appropriate to what I'm examining somebody for. Past police records, past arrest records. I could give you a list of records. So I'll ask the attorney who retains me, whether it's a defense lawyer or a prosecutor, please give me what's called a discovery, all the records, so that I can become familiar with the facts of this case. Once I do that, I schedule a meeting with the examinee and hold the meeting. It usually is 2 to 3 hours, sometimes, depending on the complexity of the case, followed up by other meetings. During the sessions with the examinee, I take notes. And the notes are my own notes. They look like this. They're handwritten notes. And these are notes which are they're not opinions, but they're simply my impression, not my impressions, but what the person told me in response to questions. I then put together the background and the notes and write a report. In this case, there was one single report dated August 17th, 2020, after all 5 exams were done. And this report consists of 19 pages, and this contains my diagnosis and all of my findings. There are sometimes follow-up reports, especially when new material surfaces. But in this case, there was no follow-up report. There is the singular report of August 17th, and this contains all my opinions. Now, subsequent to the report, Mr. Belinkus has given me other materials and more postings, but it was all more of the same. So there was nothing in the additional materials I saw that would cause me to write a revised report. A revised report would come if there was something really different, or if something I said looked not to be accurate. So that's the process. In that report, then, I have a diagnosis, and I try to address the questions the lawyer put to me, namely, what was Mr. Barisone's state of mind at the time of this shooting. And that's it. I sometimes get called to testify in court about that, as I am today.
Now, did you review anything that would address whether or not Michael Barisone was sleeping leading up to this event?
I'm sorry, that he had been sleeping before this happened?
Sleeping or not sleeping?
Oh, no, he had terrible insomnia.
And what
If
effect?
that's what, well, not just what I said, but there were all kinds of witnesses on there. His girlfriend, Mary Haskins, Ruth Cox, who was a family friend, Larry Davidson, who's the man they had there, Jason, what's his name, his assistant trainer, the young people who came forward, who were training on the farm. There must have been at least 10 or 15 people who all said the same thing, that Michael Barisone looked terrible in the last few days. This was not the Michael Barisone they knew, that he could barely get one foot in front of the other or get 2 or 3 words together, that he looked as if he hadn't slept. Several of these people, and not even interested people like his girlfriend, but just kids who were training on the farm, would comment that he looked terrible. Some of them thought that he was going to commit suicide. Some of them say he wasn't sleeping. He looked just horrible. And this was not the man they knew. They knew him as a tall, rather heroic character an Olympian, someone who was a leader, someone who trained them, and he had turned into, in their words, really a human wreck.
Now, in your report, did you discuss with Michael Barisone what he believed was going to happen to him after DCP&P came to the farm?
Well, yes, he was convinced the children would be taken away, the children would be harmed, the children would be taken away, and this was now on top of all the other fears that the horses would be harmed by Canarak and Goodwin, that Canarak and Goodwin would take away his farm, take away his possessions, destroy his reputation in the equestrian community. So in addition to all these other fears of what Canarak and Goodwin were going to do to him, all these fears which had been built up in his paranoia, there was now a brand new fear that had never been there before. The DP and DCP&P were going to take away Mary Haskin Gray's children. And that was the last straw. There could have been other last straws, but that was the thing that immediately precipitated his arming himself to defend himself, driving down and having the confrontation.
And did he indicate to you what, if anything, he believed with regards to his personal safety and the safety of Mary Haskins?
They were frightened to death. He thought that Goodwin and Canarak were going to kill him.
Now, in formulating your opinion, did any single document or statement control?
No. No, it was the buildup of thousands and thousands of documents over a period of years and really coming to fruition in the last few months before the shooting itself.
Did any single interview control what your opinion is here today?
No, it did not, and everyone who tried to intervene was impotent to do so, whether it was Mr. Tarshish, his lawyer, his girlfriend, family members. No one seemed to be able to get through to him as he became increasingly down the, let's say, the rabbit hole of this abject fear that Goodwin and Canarak were going to destroy him.
What are your opinions that you formed reviewing everything in its entirety?
Mr. Barisone, in my opinion, has two diagnoses to a reasonable degree of medical probability. And diagnoses are taken from what's called the DSM-5, which is the 5th edition of the Diagnostic Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. It's not a textbook, but it's a uniform set of criteria by which doctors will agree on diagnoses. So the first diagnosis is delusional disorder. And the second diagnosis is persistent depressive disorder.
Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what a delusional disorder is, so we can understand?
All right, these are two very different diagnoses, and really in psychiatry, somebody can have two diagnoses. Just like in internal medicine, you can have diabetes and asthma. The fact that you have one doesn't preclude the other. So people often have multiple diagnoses, and he has two. Delusional disorder, and the specific type is persecutory type, is the unreasonable belief to a delusional, unrealistic point of view that you are being conspired against, harmed, poisoned, and destroyed. Now, little asterisks, there are other kinds of delusional disorders. There's delusional disorder jealous type. That's not what he has. Jealous type is where you think that your spouse is having some kind of relationship with something that's completely unfeasible. But this is the most common kind of delusional disorder is persecutory type. It is in some regards like schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a well-known diagnosis of mental illness. It's the big daddy of mental illnesses. He does not have schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is someone who's out of touch with reality. They're hearing voices, they're seeing things, they're hearing God talking to them, they are shouting, they're screaming. That's schizophrenia. Delusional disorder has only a piece of that. That in general his thinking is intact. In general he's not screaming, he's not seeing things, but there are islands of his thinking which are contaminated by delusional thinking. That is, everything that had to do with Lauren Canarak and her family and friends became delusional. He had unrealistic, outlandish beliefs about the things that she would do or could do to him, and no one was able to reason him out of it. That's what a delusional disorder is. A simple delusion is a false belief. Any of us can have a false belief that we have an enemy that wants to harm us. But usually when you talk to friends and family and you look at evidence, you get talked out of the false belief and you realize maybe the guy doesn't like you, but he's not going to kill you. When you have a delusional disorder, you don't get talked out of the false belief. The core false belief is that Lauren Canarak was going to annihilate him. He genuinely, in his bones, believed that and did everything he could to try to protect himself against this delusion. So that's diagnosis number one. Diagnosis number two is persistent depressive disorder. This is really a chronic depression. Despite his accomplishments, his bravado, the fact that he looked like $1 million when he was in the Olympics or did dressage, he is basically a depressed person. And this probably has to do with the abuse he sustained as a child on the part of his father that we know about from his therapist, the fact that he had 2 marriages that he couldn't sustain, the fact that although his life was professionally satisfying, there were parts of it which were marked by sadness and depression. Now, these two things are not related. He has a delusional disorder, which is a fairly uncommon condition, and he has a persistent depressive disorder, which is a very common condition.
Are these two diagnoses break that? Do they meet the criteria in the...
Judge, I'm going to object to the next question.
I'll rephrase it.
And if we can be heard at sidebar.
Sure. Well, it's 1:15. Why don't we take our morning break, and I'll discuss you outside the presence of the jurors so they can relax for a little while. All right, we'll take our morning break, ladies and gentlemen.